Hello my friend, it's Keith from IELTS Speaking Success, here to give you the skills and confidence you need for the IELTS speaking test. I'm really excited actually because I'm beginning here a 6-part video series all about part 2 of the IELTS speaking. Now part 2 is the part of the test where I see so many candidates make mistakes, lose their confidence, and it's all downhill after that. That doesn't have to happen. So I want to give you a really simple framework that will help you master part 2 so you get the score you need. Let's get straight into it. So in this first video, which is the first of 6, I'll give you an overview of this framework that will help you master part 2 of the IELTS speaking test. Now then, what I will look at, I'll explain why part 2 is really important. I will then take you into the head of the examiner so you can see what they're thinking at this part. And then I'll give you this very simple framework approach. And today I'll be looking at some questions from the recent questions from 2019. And then at the end of the video, some tips on how you can excel or do really well in the part 2. And then of course, keep your eyes open for the next 5 videos. Okay, so why is part 2 so important? Well, because in part 2, it's the first time that the examiner really sits back and really listens to you. They don't have to start thinking of the next question. They just relax and they're going to be listening to see whether you can speak in longer sentences. Can you maintain your pronunciation over longer sentences? Can you develop topics? All of this is important for fluency as well as pronunciation. But also they will notice if you hesitate or if you make lots of mistakes. Mistakes in vocabulary or in grammar. So it really is, it's a key part of the test. Also, now, let me tell you what the examiner is usually thinking. By the time you get to part 2, the examiner will have decided your level between 2 bands. So they'll be thinking you're either a 5 or a 6, or you're a 6 or a 7. But they will have you between 2 bands. That's at the start of part 2. At the end of part 2, usually they will have decided which one you are. You're a 5 or a 6, or you're a 7 or an 8. And then part 3 is used to validate and confirm that. So if I think at the beginning of part 2 you're a 5 or a 6, and at the end of part 2 you're a 6, in part 3, I'm then thinking, let's confirm they're a 6. Is that true? Or actually, are there a 5? Or is it possible in some cases you may jump up to a 7? But that's unusual. You'll normally stay within those 2 bands that they had at the start of part 2. So part 2 is really important to help the examiner decide which level you are. It's not the final score. Of course, remember the IELTS speaking is across all 3 parts, but part 2 is the crux, is where some key decisions are made. Let's now have a look at the framework approach. Now, my idea here is not completely original. I know quite a few schools and trainers think of this and follow this idea. And basically it's to break down part 2 into 5 categories. But what's different in these videos is I'm going to show you a structure for each one and the kind of language that can really make you stand out and put you up at a high band 7 or band 8 level. Each video will look at one different category. Today I'll have an overview of all 5. And the categories are people, places, events, activities, and things. Okay, so let me look first at people. So a recent question was, describe a teenager that you know. Well, that's a person. It's about people. And when we're talking about people, I think we can talk about who they are, how you know them, and you can describe them. You can describe their personality or their appearance, depending on the question. And I think these three you can normally always refer to. Okay? For example, when we talk about how you know them, some of the kind of language might be, well, I first met John 2 years ago. But notice how we can make that a bit more complex. I've known John for donkey's years. I have known John, present perfect, it's a more complex tense, for donkey's years, a nice little idiom thrown in there. I've known John for donkey's years. We're leveling up the language a bit here. Or you can use a more idiomatic expression. We go back a long time. We go back a long time. Means we've known each other for a long time. So this is just a sample of the kind of language we're looking at. I will look at this in a lot more depth in the next video. Now, places, for example, an open air market you enjoyed visiting. So with places, you can talk about where it is, how it looks, what to do there, and maybe about how you feel about the place. Okay. So for example, again, with the language, where it is, instead of the usual, it is located in, where everybody says, well, it's located in London, or it's located in the north of the city. Change it round a bit. It can be found. Passive tense, nice. It's a little known place that can be found. You can build your sentences. It's a little known place that can be found in, and building more complex structures, right? Or it's hidden away in. So many places, whether they're restaurants or cinemas or bars, maybe they are hidden away in a little corner. So think about the language and the complexity about that. Let's look at events. Events are, well, things that happen. So typically describe a time when something happened. Maybe a time you received bad service, or maybe a time where somebody didn't tell the truth. So these are events. And I think with events, it's really good to talk about the setting. So the setting is, we often call the backdrop or the background. So it's where it is and what was happening then. So not just where, but what was happening at that time. So the setting, where and how something occurred. The people would be great to talk about, right? And also how it happened, or what happened at that time. So here, obviously, you received bad service, you'll be talking about that. Language-wise, well, when it happened, again, we can be thinking about the tense here. I was doing blah, 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 when blah, blah, blah happened. So it's good language, but also you can start using the if clauses. If this happened today, I would do this. Conditionals, it's more complex. Or even express a regret. If I had known, I wouldn't have, or I wish I had known. And can you see how you're getting more complex language? Just talking about what happened there, and think about the different tenses that you can use. I will go into a lot more detail in a coming video on this. We also have activities. For example, an activity you do when you are alone. Maybe it's reading a book. Maybe it's playing the guitar. Maybe it's cooking. That's what I do. Of course, you can talk about what you do, how to do it. So most activities, you can explain how to do it. How do you cook? How do you read a book? Maybe not. But if it's a sport or a game or a skill, some kind of activity you do, you can explain how to do it and talk about the challenges, because that will start bringing out richer and better language. You can see my thought process, right? My focus is always pushing up more complex language, looking for opportunities for that, right? If you're describing how to do it, there are lots of nice little idiomatic expressions you could throw in. It's a piece of cake. It's easy, right? Anyone with a shred of common sense can do it. A shred is just a bit of common sense. Anyone with a shred of common sense can do it. Or even it's not rocket science. So idiomatic expressions also nice for building up your language and vocabulary. Finally, things. For example, something lost by others but found by you. So things, I think you can talk about what it is. You can talk about how you got it. So maybe you found it, you borrowed it, you were given it, it was a present. That you could be talking about. And a description. So describing what it looks like. And that's where lots of nice language comes out, right? For example, it's reddish or bluish or greenish. So if you're describing the color, but not exactly that color, but a kind of blue, it's bluish. The shape, it's square shaped, it's round shaped, or it's pear shaped. So the language again can be interesting. Or if it's a technology item, things like it's state of the art, it's high tech, or it's cutting edge. So you can build up some really nice vocabulary when you're describing things. So this is an overview of the 5 different categories that we can use here for the part 2 questions. Now, I'm just going to flash at you some of the recent questions, and these are 2019. Have a quick look and see if you can put them into the different categories. Can you see which ones are about places? Yeah, describe a place where you read and write. Can you see which ones are about people and things and events? Now, if you're not sure, then that's perfectly fine, because actually several questions could be different categories, and it doesn't really matter. Some of them could be a thing and an event. Okay. Some of them could be an activity or an event. It's not always crystal clear. For example, describe a unique holiday you took. You could think of a holiday as a thing, or it's more maybe an event for me. If it's a one-off holiday, it's an event. If it's a regular holiday you take, maybe that's an activity. So it's not important to put them in the box, but just to use the boxes to help you just choose one and help that structure and help you find the language you need. Okay, let me move on to give you some tips for part 2. Now, I talked a lot about part 2 tips in other videos, so I'm not going into a lot of detail, but just some quick tips, some quick wins that may help you. First of all, make good use of the 1-minute preparation. And for me, I think it's really important to use that minute to get an idea. Don't be thinking about 2 or 3 ideas, which one's the best. The first one you get that is okay, not perfect, but okay, go with it. Stick with it and then move on to getting a structure. Think about now, what's the structure? Because that minute, it's gonna disappear in a minute, obviously. So you need to use that time well. Next, in the preparation, at home, research the questions, and you can find the recent questions actually on many websites. I also have a list on my website. And think about the things you could talk about. Start thinking about the ideas. Next, practice recording yourself. It's really good because two things. One, you get used to speaking for 2 minutes if you're recording yourself and timing yourself. Secondly, you can listen back and you can evaluate several things. You can evaluate fluency. Are you hesitating? You can even count how many times you Maybe you can't spot all the mistakes, but you can see if you're developing your topic, if you're hesitating, if there are big mistakes in grammar, you can usually notice when you listen back. So record yourself. In the actual test, take your time. So in part 2, a lot of candidates rush into it and go, blah, 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 and before you know it, they've fallen over, they're nervous, and it becomes messy. So at the start of part 2, breathe, take a second, and then start talking. I'm going to tell you a time when. So be in control of that space and that time, the first second or two, makes a big difference. My next tip is to stay on topic. You must stay on topic and talk about the topic or the area. If it's about holidays, talk about holidays. If it's about TV, make sure you talk about TV. So stay on topic, otherwise you will be penalized. Especially in your vocabulary, it will come right down because the examiner will see your vocabulary as off topic, not relevant, boom, it'll come right down. And that'll affect your score. Also, the examiners have to let you speak for 1 minute in part 2. But after that, if somebody is off topic or memorizing a speech, the examiner will cut them off, can cut them off, and ask that follow-up question. So just stay on topic. I also find it's really good to try and visualize what you're talking about. So if you're talking about a holiday, get the holiday in your mind, the beach, the sea, the mountain, and try and project that image in your mind. It will really help your energy, your dynamics when you're talking, makes a big difference. Next one, I'm just checking my notes, is to imagine you're telling an anecdote. An anecdote is a short personal story. So I don't mean you have to tell a story, but an anecdote is something you tell a friend, right? Last week, I went round to my grandmother's. She's quite old, so I had to help her carry the shopping up the stairs. That's it, that's an anecdote. But what it is I'm not answering a question kind of in what we call exam mode to the examiner. It's like I'm talking to a friend and I'm telling you a story, something that happened to me when I met my grandmother. So try and give that feeling and imagine you're telling an anecdote. Okay, it's a short story to a friend. Finally, do not memorize your whole speech. For the reasons I said above, if you memorize your speech, your vocabulary score will come down, examiner will interrupt you after a minute, and you will have lost your 2 minutes because you'll have only spoken for 1 minute. So don't memorize the whole speech. Those are my top tips, and that is an overview of the framework, the 5 categories you can use to help you kind of structure your talk and to start thinking about especially the language that you're going to use. Okay, so people, places, events, activities, and things. Keep your eyes open for the next videos over the coming weeks. Each one will focus on a particular category and I'll be helping you with structure and language. So it's a nice framework with some nice language templates for you. So keep your eyes open. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, please do share it, tell your friends, subscribe here, sign up for the notifications, and look out for the next one. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure being with you. Take care. Bye-bye.